This book is a huge, over 350 pages, treasure trove of research, analysis and information about King Arthur, the real historical King Arthur. Right, so as I mentioned, this is a truly massive book. It's a kind of academic book that British history is crying out for. It's full of references and good reasoning. Now, I have to say immediately, a lot of things in here, the conclusions, I don't necessarily agree with most of them, or not most of them, a lot of them. But the point is, that's not really the point. And this is where people investigating these subjects have to really remember. The main thing about this is it's a subject being treated seriously with good academic research, well referenced in the book, and you can follow up and do your own research. The key point is it treats the British records with some respect and ties them in with foreign records which match in. So the book is Journey to Avalon by well-known Chris Barber, and the less well-known to me anyway, David Pykitt. And the two of them have put a massive amount of work into this. I can only imagine. It's over 350 pages, and you'll see my notes. Almost every page I've got things scribbled on. Little notes to remind me what's where, questions, discussions. That's how I go through a book, I'm afraid. And it is a signed copy as well. Sorry, Chris. But as Alan Wilson says, you see, you either buy a book to put it on the shelf and look good, or you buy it because you want to use it and read it. And I've read this a lot. It's taken me weeks to get through it. It really is packed with information. Now, the amazing thing is, I don't want people to give up on that, because it is hard going in places. It's so rich with information. What's amazing about the book, I'm so glad I kept going, because after the book itself is finished, you got the appendices. And there's 3 of them. And to me, these are the real highlights of the book. A lot of the times you get a book, but you don't even bother reading the appendices. But in here, and hidden away, for example, on page 309, I think it is, roughly, there's a complete family tree. British, well, not complete, but there's a family tree of the Royal Imperial lineage of King Arthur. Fantastic, hidden away at the back. I wonder how many people have got this book and never even noticed that. And Appendix 3, for me particularly, was interesting. This guy mentioned Wilson and Blackett and discusses their work. And he disagrees with some of it, and he shows why he disagrees with it, and explains, you know, why he sees things differently, and looking at the evidence. That's great. That's what we want. This is how a subject matures and progresses. Not by just having like a diktat we all follow, but by looking at the research and treating the records with some respect and doing some serious analysis. So before I get to me, the most exciting parts, I'll just go through the book quickly, a quick overview, because it would take hours to analyse this book. And as you see, I realised making notes, and I got, I don't know, 10 pages of notes or something on things you could say about this book. So there we are. Really, anyway, I'll do my best. Right, so the first chapter in the introduction concentrates. There's introduction first, which is with some mention and talks about King Arthur being a historical king in South East Wales. Now, for the Wilson and Blackett fans, we're talking very much of King Arthur II here, and these two gentlemen, Chris Barber and David Pykitt, don't necessarily go with the idea of Arthur, who was part of who became the king of Greece, being Arthur I, although he does say he's a direct descendant of him. So there we are. Arthur or Arthur. I mean, like, these are kind of details which, how important are they? The legendary Arthur, the famous one, the Round Table and all that, is King Arthur II, which is what this book is about. Right, okay, so first of all, it gives you a background with Roman times. It's fairly mainstream. Tends to be a bit pro-Roman, in my view. But he does also point out things like Magnus Maximus, known to the Welsh or British records as Mascwn Wledig. And I also want to touch on a little sort of philosophical kind of point to all this, because some of these discussions, he was Roman, he was British, a lot of it, it's kind of vague how you think about this. If you've got someone who might be called a Roman, and he comes to Britain and marries a British female, a woman from the British royal family, and has children, are they still Roman? Are they still British? Does that mean the whole country is suddenly Roman because you've got this person at the throne? I mean, think about the modern situation we have with the United Kingdom. The Hanoverians were brought over in 1714. George I didn't even speak English. He was totally German. He spent hardly any time in the country. Did that mean the whole of England was suddenly German? Because a German was now the top man, as it were. And with the current royal family, the Saxe-Coburg-Goethers, or the Windsors, as they're also known, they're German heritage, or Prince Philip's actually Greek. I mean, does that mean to say that United Kingdom is now German, or half German, half Greek? Of course it doesn't. Just because you're the birth of some ancestor in another country doesn't mean the whole country comes over to you, or over to you some other place you descended from. So I think that's a bit of red herring, that discussion. When you're talking about, like in 388 and the invasion of Gaul, where you've got a British army, British people, British generals, and the king born in Britain to a British wife, and his parents are British, it's kind of British, you know. Anyway, that's just a slight sideline then. I've got a lot to get through. So he talks about Nennius and the records there, and Princess Ellen, and this kind of stuff. And he does talk in chapter 2 then, how he got the confirmation in the records, where Mascon Ledig, Maxus Maximus as the Latin name, usurped the Roman emperor, and this is kind of widely accepted. Now this is another moment where this myth of 400 years of Roman rule evaporates, where you have this British king and the Roman Empire splitting into Western Empire, Eastern Empire, well, at one point 3 empires. Anyway, let's stick to the book for now. So then you've got Gwyther, then you've got the story of Vortigern and his charmed life. How many times that guy was cornered and almost killed before anyway, the end of him. He's the one who brought in the first Saxons. And then chapter 3, we start to look at the historical King Arthur. And one of the interesting things there, it talks about the various themes about the name. Arthur is the great bear, and you've got things like Arthois, and then you've got Artorix, which means bear king, and Arctus. And giving people variations and different spellings was quite common at the time, you know, and it still happens today when you think about it. But the key there is looking at the historical relevance of this person and tracking him down. Anyway, go to chapter 4 then, the land of the Silures, a term I personally don't like very much. The Esloig is the name they refer to themselves as, or British, or Cymru, take your pick. Silures was a kind of name, and I think it's a bit derogatory, given by the Romans. So I don't know why that name is persevered with quite so much. And then he talk about how far the British came. An interesting thing, he talks about the Romans tried to tempt the British into the luxurious Roman way of life. And that makes a bit of sense to me. Because if you think Britain at the time would have been extremely wealthy, you know, the South East Wales particularly was known as the land of abounding prospects, because you had everything there. You had the agricultural land, you've got sources of everything. You've got the copper, the lead, iron, the magical tin coming up from Cornwall. From tin you get silver, lead, lime to make limestone, sorry, not limestone, quicklime. Everything you need there is there, and it's a great exporter. So the wealth that would have been building up would have been the Romans in return. I've got their problems in Northern Europe where they're fighting the Germanic tribes, and they desperately need feeding, food, clothing, equipment, possibly even the metal goods. I would even suggest some of the weaponry and armoury. It's where the iron and everything was coming from, was South Wales, so why not make the stuff there and sell them weapons? So, and this could also tie in then with the amount of coins found at the time, and not so many coins found afterwards, because the coins were coming in exchange for these goods. And in return, the British, from the situation then, to build themselves fantastic palaces and have all these Roman-style luxuries, which then suddenly they become Roman. There we go. As Alan Wilson, I love this, one of his quotes, he says, I'm a Welshman, I got a stone, I put another stone on top of it, it's a Roman war, you know. Anyway, so we go through Tintagel, Herring. In chapter 6, we've got In Search of Camelot. He looks at where the word comes from, where it possibly is. And he goes very much to Caerleon, which does seem to be the crucial part of this. Caerleon, Caerwent, up on the River Severn, on the estuary, crucial trading centre, possible early capital of the British kingdom there. Right on there, because the Severn gives you access to the Mediterranean and the main trade routes of the time. So that was the crucial point. I would argue more so than London, which headed off towards Northern Europe, where there wasn't so much going on at that period, it would seem. Okay, then we'll talk about the King Arthur, the knights, the Round Table, who some of them are, like Lancelot, is Llwch Oeddel, and people like this. Lots of information, again, well worth getting, even just as a reference book. If you can't read all of it, I have to say, it is a heavy read. Then we have the chapter 8, the Soldier Saints, where we look at people like Garman and Ithdid and Samson, Paulinus. There's a load of them. This is actually probably the biggest chapter of the book. Then we have Stories of Stone. I'm a bit disappointed here because he doesn't mention Colburn at all. I don't know if that's to avoid controversy, or maybe he just doesn't go with the theory that there was a writing system that the British and Welsh had. But there we go. And he goes with the Latin and the Ogham. And I think it's what's lacking with this book, if I may say, is that some of the brilliant insights you get with Wilson and Blackett, you don't really get here, but it does deliver the information very well. Right, chapter 10, well, it's very comprehensive. So then we look at chapter 10, the enemies of the British. Another interesting one here, because he mentioned the Gewissi, G-E-W-I-S-S-I, are a big theme that runs through different parts of this book. Because the Gewissi are supposed to what became Wessex. Now, an interesting theory from Wilson and Blackett is who the roots of the Gewissi are, and they're not Germanic at all. They were a different migration, and the name Gewissi is the source of Wessex. Nothing to do with West Saxons becoming Wessex as a name. Massively predates those, and Alfred and all that. So that's another story. What else we got then? And interestingly then, we get a list of the kings of Kent who come over as part of their migration. But then, of course, I hadn't realised, when I made these notes, that yes, there is a king list of Arthur just hidden away at the back. Right, now, first of the battles, where we get this discussion which so obsesses Arthurian researchers. And one of the disappointing things for me is enjoy this agreement, enjoy looking at different possibilities to where these battle sites are. This is not worth falling out over. You've got two people looking at historical records and both agreeing that there is an Arthur and there's a good record of it. I mean, when he lived, who he was. This is great. And then you can have different theories maybe on where different things were. Now he's gone for, first battle we talk about is Longborth, or Llongborth. And this is where he provides a lot of fascinating information about this very important estuary, the Severn, you know, the second highest tidal range in the whole world, outside Rio de Janeiro, South America. So you get it's a fascinating trading area. And what he points out, which I wasn't aware of, is the number of ports and harbours along the Severn that have since become silted up and lost. And he goes through some of the records of medieval times where areas that were being farmed are now little islands. So the path of the Severn has changed dramatically. Obviously, it's a key area, and he says it's a reasonable premise that this would have been the invasion route for the Saxons coming into Wales, Britain. And going back to Roman times, I don't know why the Romans are worried about a Saxon invasion, but there we go. This is Longborth is the port of boats, or haven of the ships. So he says it's a naval base. I don't think anyone's really disputing that. But what was very interesting for me is how many places there are you can go and see remains of, which used to be harbours and ports. And it's worth bearing that in mind when you think about the significance of the Severn. And we'll come back to Longborth when we talk about the battles. Right, chapter 12. The king goes to war. And we're about halfway through the book now, page 187. This is where we look at the Historia Britannum, which is where they got the 12 battles of Arthur. And this is always the puzzle. And I think it's a little bit of a red herring. It is great to know where these battles were. And I'm very confident that, well, very convincing to me is Wilson and Blackett's argument about where those battles are, as detailed in the War King book. And it has a logic to it, and the campaign makes sense. And he's applied a very analytical mind to why you would fight a campaign and where you'd fight it and who it would be against. But anyway, there's a slightly different approach here, and a lot of it's to do with, again, looking at names in the records and trying to match them with names you can find, you know, in ancient records or on the maps, for example. So his theory is very much, it's to do with the road building and the fact you could take a road directly across from Wales over to the east coast or Norfolk area. And if I please, if I can find the map, I should have it here. So I had this ready, yeah. And his point is that most of these battles, I hope you can see this, would have taken place over on the east coast of England, where they were trying to, you know, deal with the incursions of Angles and places like that. And he explains Arthur's like a cavalry force going in support. Anyway, we can go on about that one. This is where I think the logic does fall apart a bit, because then he tries to tie in the battle of... Because then he does agree with parts of Wilson and Blackett's deductions that Cat Coed Caledon is in the West Lowlands of Scotland. So suddenly you've got these battles in the east of England, and then suddenly it all moves up to Scotland, and then from his derivations back down again. Whereas Wilson and Blackett see it more as a campaign driving people up and out of Britain. So okay, so we go through some of the battles, and some of the place names he's got are interesting, like Cat's Ash, which he said could come from Cad Ask, because Ask, A-E-S-C, was the leader of the Saxons on the invasion attempt. Then he mentions the boar hunter course, Old Turtrith, which is a story, if you don't know it, of the wild boar ploughing through Wales and up into England and chased by Arthur and his followers, and they have to kill the little piglets and stuff. If you haven't seen the story, as Alan Wilson reads it, it's brilliant, because he sees this as the Vandal migration from Europe down to North Africa, kicked out by the Romans, went to Ireland, Arthur chased them in Ireland, and then they come through South Wales and get chased up and became the Mercians. That's for another day, but a fascinating line of research there. And then, of course, the controversial one, which is chapter 13, Badon Hill, where we look at, so of course, there's a Mount Baden in Glamorgan. Why isn't that the one? Which is close to the Severn, fits all the descriptions. I really don't see what the problem is. But he's moved this to Bannersdown village near Bath, and he gives his reasons for doing that. Well, that's fine. That at least he's not just saying, oh, the whole thing's rubbish, throw it in the bin. There's no such thing as Arthur, you know, it's just someone invented by Disney. Anyway, right. Chapter 14, the Battle of Camlann. Now, this is where things take an interesting twist, because suddenly the narrative, and he gives good reasons why he thinks this is the case, moves up the Llŷn Peninsula. And eventually, the clue is on the front cover, we're going to be looking at where Avalon is, which he puts down, I don't want to spoil the book for you, but it's not really a suspense thriller, is Bardsey Island. And this being a connection then, the Battle of Camlann, all the way up in the Llŷn Peninsula. And the most interesting to me is this, he describes Arthur fighting in Ireland before this. And he was in Ireland when Medrawd took over the kingdom, and he had to come back and recapture it. So he goes to the Llŷn Peninsula and a place, Porth Cadlan, which obviously is very close and fits on the name front. The problem I have here is, well, we just put Longborth on the Severn, and now suddenly the next series of battles are miles up here on the Llŷn Peninsula, up in North Wales. Whereas the idea of putting Camlann in Mid Glamorgan is they're all part of the campaign. You know, with Camlann as well then, you see, is that you have the landing of the ships at Longborth, as it says, the name's there. It's where the ships land. There's a furious battle on the beaches, like a Normandy landing, and then you can follow the route as the pursues Murdred's army up to near Dolgellau, where there's a place called Camlann, and there's ramparts and there's a battle site, and it would all fit in perfectly. It seems to have a lot more logic to me, rather than treating each place in isolation and trying to do it more by names. But hey, like I said, this is good research there. Now what we come to then is Bardsey Island is, the problem is then, you see, because Camlann is being placed somewhere else, then the island of Avalon has to be placed fairly near it, which is when Bardsey suddenly comes in. So we've got, it's also building on each other, you know, because of Longborth where it is, Camlann where it is, Llŷn Peninsula, east of Bardsey Island. So I think it's a little bit of a house of cards, and it's, I like people to read this book, or if you've read it, give me your thoughts on that. The other version of events makes more sense to me. You know, you land, you pursue them, and with Avalon being in Cardiff, Avlach. Do another video on that some other time. Now, another interesting part of the book, which is about Arthur becoming the Duke of Brittany. Because obviously there's a lot of Norman legends or histories or stories surrounding Arthur and how he actually belongs to the Bretons in northern France. Now, the point of this is, a lot of, again, there's no one of these arguments. It doesn't need to take place because that area was all tied in with the British kingdom. The name is a clue as well. Brittany, you know, Bretons, Britons. So they were linked anyway. And we know that Arthur spent a lot of time in Brittany. Now, what's different here in his argument is that towards the end of his career, let's get a little slight background. A lot of the British kings, well, they were a Christian country. And one of the things they would do before, as they got old, was actually kind of retire and hand over the running of the kingdom to the next in line, whoever that might be. So first of all, they hand over the military duties, and then slowly the administrative duties, and then finally they'd retire. And the great thing was you could then go off, get yourselves baptised, which eliminates all the sins from all the dirty business you've been up to running a country, you know, killing people and fighting wars and anyway, goodness knows what else rulers have to do to keep a lid on things. And then you go and live as a monk and live a simple life as an old man. And then you can go to heaven with your sins cleansed, especially if you leave a church and some land and all this. So it's great. So his theory here, tying in with that, is that Arthur actually went over to Brittany. And that's where he lived out his final years. And you can see a shrine there to him. And there he was known as Saint Armel, A-R-M-E-L. Now this is interesting to me because the common theory about Arthurian researchers is that the Normans got the story when they came to Wales and kind of looted the heritage, if you like. But this was a slightly different slant on that, because if there's Arthur stories and existence already in the sort of what became the Norman area, then they're just building on their knowledge when they came to Wales. So I think that's a fascinating line of research. I know it's another disagreement then over you know, Wilson and Blackett's idea he was buried in St. Peter's Church, but maybe the ceremony was carried out there, the body taken over. I don't know, we can look more into that, but I found that very interesting. Chapter 17, he goes through the Glastonbury hoax, and it's quite tedious, but I have to keep doing this. It's a well-known hoax from the 12th century, and it keeps getting perpetuated, that Avalon is in Glastonbury and all this stuff. And you can read a number of places about why that's... They need to fix the roof and raise money, so they came up with these stories and move some bodies supposed to be of Arthur, even though the church wasn't founded till 400 years after he died. So anyway, you have to go through it again. Sympathies to you guys. Chapter 18, did Henry VII know the truth? And this is all to do with you know, raising the Welsh banner and taking the English throne and all that, which, okay, I'm not such a big thing for me. Now, the great thing is, if you're still with me and you've borne through this book, through 300 pages, you get to the appendixes. And that's where this book suddenly springs to life. I don't know why this is hidden at the back. It's fantastic then. And this is where he talks about, first of all, the literary sources. And he provides detail, you know, of where all the information all comes from. And then you've got things like who the Venerable Bede was and what he wrote about it. You've got the Excidio de Conquesta Britannia, concerning the ruin and conquest of Britain by Gildas. And Gildas is much maligned, and he explains what Gildas was doing, what people like Nennius were doing, Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, where the words come from. Fantastic. And of course then the one who always gets slaughtered is Geoffrey of Monmouth. And what he explains in detail here is why Griffith ap Arthur, which is his more correct title, what he's actually doing was he was collating a load of ancient manuscripts and putting them together and doing his best. He didn't have any dates on them or anything. Now, as a result, the way he's done it, he's assumed, you know, sort of father, son, and full life, and you know, the dates get messed up. But he didn't have dates to work from. He was trying his best, and he goes through here the dates he did have and why he ends up being 100 years out in places and stuff like that. The problem is, for the mainstream historians and academics, the whole thing gets thrown out. So the baby really does get thrown out with the bathwater, because the dates are in confusion, all the information's ignored. With what people like Chris Barber and David Pykitt have done here, really good work, is just order the work he was trying to order, and not just say, oh, he's a complete liar and a fraud. He wasn't trying to defraud anybody. He was trying to sort out the history, and without him, a lot of this would have been lost completely. So it's a very interesting defence, if you like, of Geoffrey of Monmouth. I'd rather he was referred to as Griffith ap Arthur, but then no one knows who you're talking about. And then he talks about who Arthur's father was, how he's called Uther Pendragon, but that's a military title. It does refer to Meirig, and he explains how it's Meirig, how the confusion comes in with Cornwall. It's brilliant. Now, another interesting one is he talks about who the Medrawd was who fought Arthur. And this is where, again, there's another disagreement over some of the dates for the 30 years thing and all that. And it is a bit confusing, too much for this video. But, again, it ties in with the date changes. And he actually has Mordred down as someone else. Instead of Medrawd, Plow, which is a Mordred he has. Oh, I did have the notes. Go through my, rather than have you wait for that, I'll crack on. He also talks again about Maskin Ledig and Arthur 1, and why he thinks it wasn't Arthur 1, although he does agree he was a descendant or ancestor, and the connections, and it's Arthun instead of Arthur. Alright. That's a big deal for people, fine. Right, and the Brutes of Tasilio, where the earlier works came from. It's William of Malmesbury, Tylo's book, Lambeth. I tell you, if this book could be sold just for the appendices, it'd be a better book, to be honest. I think it's fantastic. And he goes through more life of the saints, where that comes from, including Saint Arthmile, and how that connects with Arthur. So that, please, if you get bogged down in this book, don't give up. Just jump to the appendixes, or just go to the appendixes. I didn't pay a lot for this book. I think you can pick them up. Okay, and he goes through the... lots of information there. And Appendix 2, chronology, the events in the life of King Arthur. And then he goes through all the dates in a very good way. As I said, some of them people might have different views on, but it's very good to see it all laid out. And like, as I said, throughout the book there's references and footnotes and stuff like that. And he goes tying in the events, and of course he's building on his theory or his proposition or hypothesis that Arthur ended up buried on Bardsley Island. He says some interesting stuff about Bardsley Island as well, which is quite good. They seem to have some sort of greenhouse for growing things, which would be the reference to the glass palace. But maybe that as it may be, I don't know. And Appendix 3 got very excited. It's so rare you see Wilson and Blackett having any of their work analysed. He's only analysed Arthurius Rex, unfortunately. It's a great book. Good introduction, but I know some of the things he mentions in here, actually, Wilson and Blackett have written about since and changed their position a bit. But it's good to see it mentioned, good to see it analysed. And then what is brilliant for me, I just love this, all references, or not all of them, there's more, but a long list of references to historical Arthur. I think it should be right at the front of the book. This gives the whole thing credibility. And it goes through the life of St. Cadog, the Landcarvan Charters, the registers of donations to Lambeth Church, and then we got the book for sale, the Lambeth Charters. Wilson Blackett go through where you can see land grants and stuff, and where Arthur's mentioned, or at least one of those. And then you've got the Abbot of Neath Abbey, who had a lot of documents which have since been lost, and that was in the 15th century. 16th century, you got John Price of Brecon with Historia Britannica Defensio, and then there's Lewis Morganwg in the 16th century, and then there's a whole long list of references and stuff, and some of them go back to medieval times, and that to me is the most important part of the book. It's just so much hard work has been done putting together this massive tomb of work. And then he talks about some of the other theories. You know, Arthur's been placed in Scotland, and he was some, what did one film have him as? I think it's the one with Ewan in it, wasn't it? Whether he's some sort of steps cavalry guy, he was auxiliary for the Romans, and he just gets drafted in, and hey, you can be king of the British, you know. It's some bizarre stuff. Then he also goes through some of the king lists. Again, gold dust. This is really good. It's great to see another researcher coming at it and finding it, you know, from a different direction. What people don't realise is this idea of a Dark Ages is very much an invention. There is tens of thousands of manuscripts, like the Harleian manuscripts, the ones in Jesus College. There's loads, with loads of information talking about British history, and it's just discarded or ignored or just pretend it doesn't exist. So he's done a lot of work going through all of that. You got the lineal descent. He talks about how we get from Maskin Ledig all the way down to Gulgan. It's just a mine of information here. And then other books talking about There's the Monasticum Anglicum, written in 1673, compiled by William Dugdale from the Ancient Register of Llandaff Cathedral again, where you can see mention of Maurice being the father of Arthur, which pinpoints him then, because Maurice is quite well recorded. So you can pinpoint who his father is, you can pinpoint who he is. And then the conversation about, you know, when did he become a king, Arthur? Because in some ways, it's almost like he never became king. I know that sounds a bit strange. But his old king Moirig lived to a ripe old age. And while Arthur was taking over the duties and was head of the army, you know, Dux Britannia, all these different titles people come up with, he was in charge of the army and the active military stuff. Old Moirig was back, you know, running the shop. And if Arthur might have actually died before him. So, you know, what's your definition of king in that situation? What I love here as well is, we'll give the final word, it's not the final word, but I'll quote from the book, we give the final word to Leslie Alcock, the eminent Arthurian scholar and archaeologist who in his book Arthur's Britain, written in 1971, prophetically observed that a new appreciation of some of our 5th and 6th century texts is developing, and it seems likely that over the next decade, many of our current interpretations will be revolutionised. And you can see his book there, it's called Arthur's Britain, published by Penguin. So this was picking up speed, you know, and Wilson and Blackett, and then of course Chris Barber's and loads of books on Wales and that's some fantastic stuff. It was picking up speed, but it seems to be kind of this continuous suppression of it and ridicule it still goes on. There's a lovely little chart then showing how the story moved around and where it came through and back. And then Appendix 4, yes, this is the book, the appendices, which is alternative theories. And then he goes through lots of ideas that have been knocked around. He's put Wilson and Blackett in the alternative theories here. I find a little bit frustrating. Anyway, his only real, he says, interesting, he says there, Blackett and Wilson failed to notice, however, that this Arthur they claim is Arthur I was in fact the direct ancestor of Arthur ap Moirig, to whom they have as Arthur II. What's the whole point? He's a direct ancestor. Anyway, I don't understand. I think some of this is trying to distance himself for some reason. He doesn't really... I actually start putting ticks most of it. Disagreements are actually agreements. There we go. Perhaps we can talk more about these particular subjects. But like I say again, I don't want to get wrapped up in minutiae and detail. The important thing is this is taken as a serious subject, and the record's looked at seriously, and it's not just treated as some joke or legend or myth or dismissed or laughed and sneered at by academics, as happens so often. You know, my own experiences are starting to promote this work now and get things published. The reaction is quite dreadful sometimes. Oh, laughter and it's all a load of rubbish. And no, not prepared at all to actually look into it. And of course the big thing in his conclusion here, which is missing, I would say, is the whole thing about was there a comet in 562 AD, which explains why this civilization was whacked. But again, that's another thing. He does mention a plague, though. So there we go. And then look at this. You see, this is what it does as well. A bibliography, and there's pages and pages and pages. It's a proper academically written book, you know. More and more references. It's fantastic, you know. If you want a particular author, or it's wonderful. It's just absolutely wonderful as a research thing, and a glossary of the names and the terms. So like I said, you haven't got to agree with everything. It's really, to my mind, not important. That's part of the subject growing, and that's where we want to be, where people are disagreeing over interpretations rather than just saying that's all a lot of rubbish, you know. And then proper index and a really well put together book, and I'd highly recommend it. Like I said, don't be put off by the massive size of it and the richness of information, because it really is incredible, really. But it's also got loads of good pictures, lots of references to places I hadn't heard of, loads of things that were new to me, and it was a struggle in places. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm glad I made a lot of notes and where to look for things, because reading it all again would be quite daunting. But everybody who's interested in historical King Arthur, South East Wales, 6th century, should get hold of this, if nothing else, to read the appendices, which are effectively, I don't know, 80 pages or something. So that's almost like a book in itself. And I would ask to consider even producing that with maybe a short story at the front, and not worry so much about exactly which hill is Bardon Hill and Camlann and things like that. They're good to know, and they are important to a certain extent. It's not the bigger picture though. And please, even if you disagree with some of the points in here, go to it for the information and the wonderful work they've done. So well done those guys. That's another book review. More to come. So please, and don't forget, we've got discussion going on. Britain's Hidden History group, we've got forums, websites, buy some of the books. I don't sell this one, I'm not promoting it. I've got no connection, I never met the authors. I just wanted to share my thoughts and just how much you can gain from this book. Alright, so until the next time, Heddwch.